Well, what is up, my brethren? It is the week ending. What is it going to be? The 9th of Feb. It's Upside. I'm with Lomax Ward. I'm with Mads Jensen. Gentlemen, Lomax, what's cooking with you? What's new? What's the good? What's the bad? What's the ugly?
All good. The sun is out in Lisbon. We've had a bit of rain in January, and I
Can you
look at
send
my
some?
forecast now, and I know. Wow, yeah. No, I want to keep it here. All is good, man. All is
Although
good.
We've
you just
got
went and got
blue
another jacket on.
sky.
You just went and put a jacket on.
I did, but I took it off again pretty quickly because I realized I was too hot. I mean, I'm enjoying I've got my popcorn out, and I'm enjoying what's going on, in the White House at the moment. Back and forth, up and
Yes.
down. Yin and yang, in and out.
Yeah.
Otherwise, yeah, good week. Some good news this week, which we're going to talk about.
Yeah, we are. We are. Mads, what's cooking in your world?
Listen, sky is blue in London. I don't know what people are talking about. It's been a beautiful day. There's been a really interesting week. Lots of interesting announcements out of number 10 that we're going to talk about. Lots of stuff happening around AI.
Yeah, and you were in
we
number
had
10. Don't be coy. You were in there with Kia, shaking, pressing palms.
And talking to people and yeah, I think we'll unpack it in a bit, but I think there's some really interesting things happening. So
Yeah,
Have
no,
we got a
it's
photo of
gonna
you
be-
at number 10, Mads, or not? Have we got a photo?
of course I do.
Good. Haven't
Did
seen
you
it on
steal
LinkedIn
anything
yet.
from the toilet?
I haven't seen it on LinkedIn yet, So.
Yeah, no. Mads isn't as cheeseball as me. I'd be right in there doing selfies in the loo. Right, we've got a really packed sesh today. We're going to talk a little bit across the pond, looking at some earnings reports. We're looking at Cherry. We've got German election stuff. We've got some number 10, some UK government stuff, which is super interesting. And Mads, I want you to dig into that, having just been there. We've got Trump starting a sovereign wealth fund. Have a look at what's happening in Europe, especially in Norway's success over there. So we've got loads and loads on the docket. We're going to start right at the top. Mads, what's happening? Give us a quick reflection on what's happening in its earnings season for tech stocks in the US. Give us the quick rundown without digging in too much, because obviously it's American, not European.
Yeah, no, true. There's a little bit of a European angle as well. I think it's been, what are some of the bigger news? So Palantir, they've came out with a very, very bullish, very upbeat announcement, sort of, almost saying, look, we got Elon in there, we got Doge, we're going to reform government, we got Thiel pulling the strings of all the puppets. And because of that, we are just incredibly bullish. Basically, we are going to run all these government services. And the stock shot up 24% here after that announcement, having already had an incredible run over the last year. So Palantir is firing on all cylinders, not so much Google. Google's cloud business grew 30%. The market had expected 35%. Stock was down 7% immediately. They are outlooking $75 billion of CapEx. Market had expected 60. So there's some questions around, are they going to be able to turn that into growth? And if the company is growing less than we expect, but they're spending more on CapEx than we expect, is Google really as good a business as we were all hoping? So there are some of those concerns. Big shift in terms of vibes. I don't know if you recall a couple of years ago, Google was all about, we're not going to use any of our AI powers for weapons or defense. Well, all of that is taking a change now. That sort of part of the mission statement has been struck, as has some of this talk around DEI, where Google is saying, look, we're probably not going to focus as much on that as we have been known to do in the past. AMD missed on data center revenue. Why is that important? Because you're probably one of the main companies that could challenge NVIDIA. Company was down 7% after hours. It's not yet DeepSeek related. It's DeepSeek's really only been released now. But there is an overall nervousness in the market now about whether these semiconductor manufacturers can keep up the good stuff and keep delivering these incredible earnings runs we have seen.
So just check in, none of these figures are going to include the potential DeepSeek shockwave. Is that fair? Is that true?
No.
None of these figures.
Well, not on revenue, but in terms of the sentiment is what I'm going to say. There is some overall nervousness in the market. If we were going to have a bit of a UK/Euro angle, Q3 revenue up 19%, but they've slightly downgraded full year forecast, and the stock was down ever so slightly today. It's important to remember with ARM, there's only 10% free float. Masa still owns 90% over at SoftBank. We're going to talk more about Arm later in the show. Some exciting news about stuff they're doing together with SoftBank that I actually think could transform the company a little bit, but we'll touch more on that. Lomax, you had some other ones on the earnings front?
Well, let's not forget when it comes to earnings of public tech companies, we have some public tech companies in Europe. There are a couple.
In Europe?
You know, I don't, shock horror. Sure, no, not, I mean, you know, not all of them are listed in Europe, but we do have some listed tech stock here. You actually need to take a bit of time to think about it and look for them. But, you know, ASML, a Dutch company that manufactures the very, very important machines that are used in semiconductor manufacturing that have a quasi-monopoly, 95% of the market. They published some great results, 9 billion of sales for the quarter, and 7 billion of bookings, which is a great indicator of future business. And that was double what the analysts predicted. Now, if anything, they operate on a massive lag to, for example, the DeepSeek news as a, you know, very far down the supply chain in the semiconductor sector, but really robust. So that's a really strong European company. Spotify up 5% MAU, monthly active users up last year, nearly 700 million, strong revenue growth up 20%. So good news for Europe. And I think looking at the big picture, in January, European stocks had the second highest inflows for 25 years.
Nice.
And if you got a bell down, I don't know, the European
I'm ringing it right now. You just can't hear it.
Yeah, ring it now, but drum roll. European stocks outperformed the US stocks in January, largely driven by the DeepSeek crash at the end. But I mean, guys, come on. We can all be morose and, you know, lugubrious in Europe, but not always. It's not all doom and gloom.
We'll take it.
Nice. I just don't think we shout as much about it. That's great.
We'll take it, even if it was on a slight technicality, but we'll take it.
A win's a win.
Take it anyway. So some more good news in Europe. So Cherry Ventures have just closed their £500 million raise. It's Cherry 5. So it's $500 million. It's Cherry 5. So they've got a two-pronged strategy with this $500 million, which is part early stage and then backing their own winners post B into growth. So they're a Berlin, London, Stockholm outfit. The operator-led VC Cherry Ventures. Very, very cool. I think they were, where do the founders come from, Lomax? You know them, don't you?
The founders of Cherry, I wish I knew them. I've done a deal with them, but not that well, no.
There's a lander. Anyway, so they've raised. So this is on your docket. Was there anything else that you wanted to kind of chat about apart from this great European VC fundraise, which is obviously we must shout from the rooftops about? Was there anything else that you wanted to dig into?
I wanted to say, well, first of all, you know, we're 5 weeks into the year now, and this is great to see a big sizable funds being announced in Europe, despite some of the challenges in the fundraising environment. I would also like to say that, you know, last year we saw inflows, big fundraisers to the established funds in Europe, you know, Balderton's, Index, Atomico, and Axel. Those funds.
And this is mirroring the States, isn't it? This bifurcation is mirroring what's been happening over the pond as well, isn't it? So all the big guys are getting all the dollars.
Exactly. They hoover up people, flight to quality or flight to safety or relative safety, etc. Now, I think like what we're having in Europe now, as the if you look at the US, you've got the established big platform funds. You've got at least 20, 30, 40 that you almost put into that category, right? And actually in Europe now, as the industry matures, you now have funds like Cherry, like Local Globe, starting to move forwards to start to challenge or join those kind of funds at the top of the ranking. So I feel like this is only a good thing for Europe. You know, you have you start off with your 50 mil, 75 mil, 100 mil seed funds, largely backed by government. You know, go through the fundraisers, Fund 2, Fund 3, Fund 4. You know, Cherry. These are big amounts of money, and they're going to start to knock on the door of the bigger funds, which can only be a good thing. It gives more options to founders, gives more options for us when we think about, you know, along with our founders, who would be the right funds to partner with on the next stage of the journey. So I think it's great to see.
Yeah, I think it's worth mentioning is they're quite a young firm. So I think it's only
Yeah.
2012 when it all started. So it's whatever, 12, 13 years old.
Well, I mean, and
So
also to be honest, that I would, you look at some funds that are probably on a similar trajectory, right, to my mind, and you guys agree or disagree, but I would say you've got Local Globe, you've got Blossom, which is a much younger firm. You probably put in, you've got 20 VC, raising similar amounts of money, even younger. So I feel like those kind of firms are on a great trajectory, and are only good for both, showing that there is appetite for European venture, but also offering founders more options, and generally just, creating more smart investors in Europe. And also, don't forget, they probably don't want to think about it now, but you'll also have, like you have in the US, you'll have GPs spinning out of these funds in the next 4 or 5 years, setting up their own funds, right? And that's how these ecosystems grow. So I think it's great.
yeah, I mean, you have founder mafias soon. Hopefully in Europe, we'll have GP mafias, VC mafias. So
Yeah,
bring it on, I say.
we've already had it. Matthias spinning out of Atomico with Moonfire. So I feel like it is happening, but it's going to happen more and more and more.
We just need more, right? We just need. I mean, I think people still don't appreciate that the European venture, last time I looked, was growing 4 times faster than the States. So we just need more. We need more doing more, I think is a fair general push. So listen, another one of yours, Lomax. We're going to stay in Europe, in continental Europe, in Germany. A quick election update. What's on your mind with this?
Well, I think it's just a reminder that the biggest economy in the Eurozone is having a pretty pivotal election in the next 3 weeks. What does that mean for tech? I mean, no expert on German politics, but I think if you look at the AfD, the Alternative for Deutschland, far right anti-immigrant party, is now second in the polls. We talked about them last week, 20% now. The incumbent, historic incumbent, the party of Angela Merkel, Olaf Scholz, is struggling in comparison. So I feel like this is a pivotal kind of moment. We've had strong men and populist leaders in some smaller economies within Europe. I mean, no one's suggesting that AfD will be, taking full power in Germany, right? The leading party is at 30% in the polls, above their 20. But you saw a very interesting development, I think, in Germany last week, where for the first time, I think ever, a motion was passed in the Reichstag, or a motion was passed in the German parliament, which was carried by the AfD. And I think that is very, Angela Merkel came out of retirement to strongly critique this, and effectively saying that this is a very, very bad sign. What does it mean for tech? I mean, I don't think any of these parties are particularly anti-tech. If anything, they're keen to invest in security, technological sovereignty. The immigration policy is slightly what worries me, because the AfD is this was the mainstream party leading this motion to close the borders and make immigration a lot harder. And we all know that, actually to have a vibrant tech economy and ecosystem, you need to have a very sensible, open immigration policy to make sure you're attracting international talent to come and build companies. So that's the only real kind of takeaway I had from looking at the German election this week.
I was geeking out a little bit on some of their policies. So I was looking at the AfD, and there are, across the Christian unions, the AfD, the SPD, that kind of that probable set coalition that's going to come into power, they are talking a lot of the similar topics. They're talking about deregulation, tax incentives, buying German. So there are lots of what I would argue are going to be quite friendly for VCs, for investment, for tax incentivized investment. They're making the noises. What is rhetoric? What is noise? And what is actual policy? What are they trying to buy votes with? And what actually will they do? Who knows? But it feels like there is a common language of investment, a bit like here with Reeves and Stein. We're talking about investment, but let's see what they actually do. Mads, you got any thoughts on what's happening in Germany?
Look, when the centrist parties, they don't deliver, it paves the way for populism. And, the AfD, like them or loathe them, it's not their fault that the German economy hasn't been performing. It's very easy to sort of say, look, it's these fringe players, they're not in power. The centrists, we are in power, if you will, right? And so, Merkel had a certain strategy that I think many people were supporting at the time or were impressed by, but in retrospect, actually probably wasn't the best for Germany. Kind of the coasting up to Russia, the reliance on Russian gas,
Yeah.
some of the immigration policies that I think are leading to some of the tension you have right now. Listen, I'm a liberal. Notionally, I would love to have open borders and for all of us just to get along and trade and peace, and it's all wonderful. I think some of the stuff that we've seen just doesn't quite work. If you go to Sweden, they've had some experiments around this stuff, and it's not pretty. Several of the countries are sort of, folks are pushing a bit the other way. And so I think to some extent, say us centrists, we probably have been not quite delivering what we should. And so folks are upset and the populists are charging in and we can't really blame them. I think we really only have ourselves to blame. Back to, what do we do about it? Well, we've got to deliver growth. We've got to deliver the stuff people need, growth, security, all the things people expect of their countries. And so how do we do that? I think that's really the bigger discussion and not who's the bogeyman and how can we vilify them. It's for us to deliver. I think that's the most important thing we can do.
Yeah, well, the trees are definitely being shaken, and Trump being the biggest tree shaker of them all. So, if nothing else, my sense is this period of time in this populist push is going to create some change and shake the trees and do some new things, good and bad, obviously, but hopefully we'll get some reform out the back of it. So, coming back to the UK, and obviously Germany. Part of their problem was shutting off all their nuclear to then rely on Russian and gas and Russian energy. But that's not the case in the UK. I was reading from Matt Clifford today that we're going to get more nuclear. So the UK government is enabling developers to put in planning, which will be accelerated. And we're looking at becoming a nuclear country again. And they're going to push it through. So, Mads, do you want to kick this topic off?
I think it's an incredibly exciting announcement. The UK, believe it or not, it's sometimes hard to sort of remember that we've been first with a lot of things, but the UK was the first country in the world to build a nuclear reactor in 1956. And then the last reactor was built in 1995. So nothing new for 30 years. We've been sort of, trying to construct this new Hinkley Point C. It's been under construction for years of delays. The environmental assessment alone to get the planning permission is a 30,000-page report. I just don't understand. What are you going to fill in all those pages? But obviously, that's the stuff that takes time. There are issues around whenever somebody gets a planning permit for anything, let alone a nuclear power plant, you have multiple legal challenges you can mount against slowing things down. And while we've been busy slowing things down, China is hard at work constructing almost 30 new nuclear reactors. Elsewhere in Europe, 12 new nuclear reactors at a planning stage. France, obviously a leader there, has been, went nuclear decades ago and, has a much better energy mix from that perspective. So 4 concrete steps are being taken now here in the UK. I think it's great. Many nuclear power stations are being included in the planning rules, so developers can apply to create those. And importantly, they're scrapping the set list of sites where these can be built. So these are extremely safe new types of reactors. And of course, this ties straight in with what we're trying to do around AI, because AI requires a lot of power. And if you build new AI centers, then the idea is you should be able to build new nuclear power plants of these new smaller, ultra safe variants nearby, so you have power to match the load. Finally, I'd say the number 10 is setting up a new nuclear regulatory task force, and it's going to report directly to the PM. So sort of, Keir's saying, look, I'm serious about
That's what
this.
I'm hearing. He's getting
Yeah,
his founder
I'm
mode.
serious about this. I want it to happen. Any issues, any blockers, come straight to me. I'm going to try and help sort it out. So, listen, we haven't built anything yet, right? The announcement was today, but I think this is the kind of leadership we need to see. I hope the thing they follow up with now are some quick announcements of deals being done. And I think this is maybe where we can learn a little bit from, what happens across the pond, where government is very active in engaging directly with contractors, developers, people with projects to say, let's go do this thing, as was done with Stargate. right? Instead of waiting for folks to come around and sort of having this protracted period of cat and mouse, we don't have time to wait. We need to move fast. So I hope government will be very proactive in engaging with the developers directly.
Yeah, wonderful. Lomax, what's your thoughts on this one?
Well, first of all, like it's great that the government are on top of this, and one of the challenges with clean energy is that it's intermittent. We know this, which then gives you issues with batteries and the complexity around that and the infrastructure needed for that. So to have a
Where are we
clean,
at? Are we about, I think last time I read, we're about 25% in the UK, 25% renewables on average?
yeah, on some days it's been a well over majority. Depends on how much wind's blowing. Yeah, that's the problem. To have a base load clean energy supply is an absolute no-brainer, and to be able to leverage off these new technologies that are being funded by VCs and built by amazing founders in Europe in particular is very cool to see. Just stepping back, and I don't want to pour cold water on the government and their plans and their enthusiasm for things like this, but
You're European, Lomax. You could give it a try anyway.
And we can be miserable.
yeah. So I'm gonna do it. I think like this is great. This is, it falls a little bit into what we talked about last week about the extra runway at Heathrow. Like these are long-term projects that we're not going to see any upside from a very, very, very long time, right? And that is great. They're good for sentiment because I think you guys feel great about it on this chat, and so do I. I think it shows that we're kind of investing for the long term, but this isn't going to be finished for a very, very long time. And it's great that we're cutting red tape.
Why are you saying that, Lomax? The build lead time for these new reactors is quite short. I was looking at the Nucleo stuff, and they're looking at 5 years. They've started deployment of one of their reactors now, and they're looking to go live in 5 years' time. So is that the kind of time scale that you're talking about, or longer?
Well, no, even then, 5-10. I think even 5-10 years when you gross it up for planning, challenges, etc., it's never going to be. If the provider is saying 5 years, what does that actually mean in the real world? And so I think that's great, but at the same time, the government needs to, listening to a very good political podcast the other day, where they were saying one thing the government haven't managed to do is really diagnose what the real problem is with growth in the UK. They haven't come out with a very coherent, this is the problem, this is why, these are the reasons why, and this is how we're going to fix it. They seem to be throwing a lot of things at the wall in a relatively haphazard manner, while, as we talked about last time, in the short term, increasing, making it harder to do business for small businesses, which actually affects people now, this year, and then, talking about long-term development projects that we won't see the benefit from a very, very long time. And so it's just an observation. I don't want to be too negative about it because I think we have to, we can only control the future. We can't look backwards. I think it's just important to remember that. I think another point away from politics is the cost of electricity and energy in Europe, right? I think Mads has talked about this before, is when you step back, if you were, introducing a Martian to the world, one of the big questions would be, wow, your price for electricity and energy is off the charts in Europe. It's more than double what it is in the US, and significantly more than other countries. And so, and it was also Mad said that this can be a big part of many, many companies' P&L, a big part of their cost base, in particular for data centers, if you're thinking about technology. So it's great that we're trying to find ways to bring that down. So I'm very, very happy about that. But this is something that I think we should kind of always be, mindful of. The US take the US, for example, has a wealth of natural resources that we just don't have in Europe. And it's been able to actually, create its own energy sovereignty in a way that we haven't been able to. And we've become reliant on third parties, and it turns out in a relatively nefarious third party. So it's good that we're trying to fix these problems. And, we can only fix.
But we have the North Sea, but I think if memory serves, most of that is run by Norway, isn't it? So, I mean, we do have, and also
it was a big part of the Scottish independence campaign, so I don't think it's just,
And also on the American energy, I was looking at the kind of oil because I couldn't work out why, if America is oil oil neutral, so they produce as many barrels as they need. I couldn't work out why they were still massive net importers, but it turns out the type of oil that they're creating, mainly by fracking, they can't and then refine. So there's also challenges within the data when it looks like, for example, America being quite energy independent. There are challenges within that in itself, because I know that we are doing a lot with renewables. Hopefully this nuclear program comes online in the UK, and I'm slightly counter to your position on this timescale piece, because my sense is that the technologies are evolving. And going back to Nucleo very quickly, they were a London-based startup, super European outfit, I think run by a couple of Italians originally.
Founded by Stefano
London-based.
Buono, who's a wonderful, founder of one of the biggest, tech companies that exited that you probably never heard of, right? So yeah, one of the Europe's best entrepreneurs.
And I know they've now headquartered into Paris for all the obvious reasons, because France is big on nuclear. So I kind of get it. It makes strategic sense, and they've got some big French investors, I think, including the French government. But if you look at what they're building and the technology, and I don't know what's true and what's not true, don't shoot the messenger, but it looks like they're using this new MOX fueling, which is effectively nuclear waste process. So from the old trad plants, that waste recycled into these lead-cooled mini reactors. And it looks like a fully circular system. It looks like just bloody smart, small nuclear reactors. So that's on our doorstep. I mean, so if this technology is here, it's faster than it was. And if the planning bit can be slickened and accelerated, then we might be, I don't want to sound too optimistic, but this might be a really super cool thing. And
I'm happy to
won't
be
take
proved
15
wrong.
or 20 years. Good. Me too.
No, I'm completely with you, and I think there's a wider point here, which is that we got to make it legal to develop and do and build and grow, and make things happen again. And I think we became a little bit navel gazing, and we thought we were so cool and tied ourselves in knots. We've been talking about Heathrow for 2 decades, and it's almost sort of this holier than thou. If you look at the carbon intensity of the UK today, it is a third of not just the US, but also of Canada and Australia. And yet we're talking about, should we have another runway and can we afford it? Guys, we are optimizing on this teeny tiny thing to the detriment of our growth and our welfare for the sake of nothing that moves any needle anywhere in the world. If you want to look at the big opportunities to tackle climate change, it's got nothing to do with Heathrow. Okay. Yeah. But what does have to do with Heathrow and the UK economy is we need to build, we need energy, we need data centers, we need infrastructure and transport, and we need to be proud of supporting the entrepreneurs, the founders, the people that can make that happen. Let's go, guys. Let's go and make it happen. So I think we need some of those animal spirits back. And I think, Dan, to your point, yes, maybe the third runway will only be there in a decade from now or a little bit more, but we got to get going. And even the project work, the infrastructure, the build, all of that will create economic activity. So let's go. Let's go. No time to waste.
Who also knows? I also don't want to get too lost down the rabbit hole. But who also knows what kind of new kinds of fuel there will be by the time these new runways are opened? So it might be. I've seen a lot of new types of fuel generation, all kinds of clever technology. I have no idea how it works, but
that's a very good point. And that's, SAF, sustainable, airline fuel, which is not something I know a lot about, to be honest, but I don't want to be the Mr. Pessimist here, but someone's got to play that role, like the SAF.
You taking that mental?
No, like sustainable aviation fuel could have a major, impact on the environmental impact of Heathrow to the good. But at the same time, it may.
We know that wide body is not going to be battery powered anytime soon.
For example, it may change the way in which, and now I may be jumping at shadows, but it's like it may change the way in which, people travel. You just don't know. I don't, it's like, or it's not necessarily SAF, but technology may change the way in which people travel. And so in a way, like the kind of airport you're building now may not be the airport that is needed in 15 years time. I'm not suggesting we're going to have like hypersonic by that time, which we're not. But my point is, it may change. You may not need to change at Heathrow, for example, because you may have longer range or something. I don't know. Yeah. Or you may be, with SAF, with sustainable aviation fuel, you may be able to run more flights that are less environmentally damaging, which means you don't need to stop in Heathrow if the demand is there. So I don't
Or we
know,
could be
but
the
as
hub.
Lad says, maybe I could keep jumping at shadows forever, and at some point you need to get on with it. So maybe I just wave the white flag and Mads, we get on with it.
Boom.
Listen,
Let's go.
we have no choice but to go for it, I think, is the universal
No,
opinion
I
here,
think
which I totally
there's a
agree.
point that I'm making, and we've been through this before, but it's just like it's all very well talking about this stuff, but I really want, first of all, I would love to have some coherent strategy behind this whole thing. Okay, number one, maybe that's me intellectually asking for too much, because it just would be as a sort of small, simple-minded person. I would like to have a little bit more of a kind of coherent 5-10 year plan. Yeah.
But Lomax, it's okay to throw some stuff at the wall. Throwing energy production at the wall is an okay thing to do, I think.
Yeah,
Almost kind
fine,
of get
but
amongst it.
Is it too much to ask of our government to actually, in one of the biggest economies in the world, to actually come up with a proper plan that actually does have coherence to it? We can certainty. Business wants certainty. I want certainty. Founders want certainty. Investors want certainty. And so Heathrow wasn't even a thing 5 weeks ago. I mean, I guess in our world,
It was a
nuclear has been,
reinvented thing from over the last 30
Yeah.
years. It's been a broken record.
nuclear technology has been bubbling away in our world in technology in the last couple of years, right? With the fundraisings and except we talked about it on this pod at the end of last year with nuclear's last fundraise, etc. But my point is, okay, maybe I can't have a coherent plan. That's fine. That's just me. I will be unhappy. It doesn't matter. What I would like, which I don't think it's an unreasonable ask, is to do stuff that has immediate effect this year, next year, the year after. Yeah.
Yeah, I think
We
that's
can
fair.
do
I
these
think that's
big
fair, but
things, which are great for the long term, are great for sentiment, but we need to be working down here as well.
You very
I completely agree
elegantly
on that.
segued me into Mads. You were at number 10 Tuesday this week. So, segue galore. There we are.
Yeah, absolutely. We'll talk about the AI plan, which I think has some near-term implications. But I mean, on your wider point, Lomax, about the plan, I mean, there was a place in the world that was very, very good at these long-term plans, right? It was the Soviet Union. They made these 5-year plans deciding how everything in the economy was going to work. And I just think we've got something that's far, far more powerful here. We've got capitalism. And I think once you enable capitalism, entrepreneurs, investors to pursue great objectives to create wealth and value in the world, we're going to do the right thing. But you need to unleash it. You can't keep holding it back. You can't tie it up in all this red tape. And so when we say a business needs certainty, I agree. And I think that's going to be the certainty. The government is there to back us to get things done, not to hold us back. What I don't think we need is for government to plan where every little power plant needs to be.
No.
these-
We don't need
right?
prescription. You're right. I get
So,
no.
right?
I'm
So,
not. Yeah.
So
yeah.
it's the certainty that says if you got a project and it aligns with one of our big objectives, which is more energy, more technology, more growth, government is going to try and do everything it can to help you make it happen. That's really what we're looking for, and I think at least in spirit, those are some of the vibes we're getting. Let me flip over to this new AI plan. The work started last year, right after the election. Matt Clifford did some great work pulling together a 50-point plan, specifically on how AI can become a global leader the UK can become a global leader in AI. The government has adopted all 50 points of the plan, and earlier this week, Keir Starmer convened a number of founders and investors at number 10 to talk about exactly this. And I think there were some really, really positive takeaways from the event and from the messaging that's come out of number 10.
Do you think he's going to do it, Mads? You were there, whites of the eyes, in the room, feeling the energy. Do you feel like this is going to happen?
He absolutely wants to do it. One thing that's sometimes said about him is that he is a little cautious. Another thing that's said about him is he's quite steely and Machiavellian. And he made no mistake. He said, our ambition is to be the global leader. I want to be a global leader. Of course, it's not a question of the UK overtaking the US and China, but playing in the Super League, in the Premier League of AI nations. It's absolutely where he wants us to be. What he's done is he's taken all 50 recommendations developed by Matt Clifford and that working group, he has underwritten all of them and said, we're going to adopt every single one. All of them have actions, all of them have owners, all of them have timescales. And he's now hired Matt Clifford into number 10 to implement the recommendations and help make them happen. So it's easy to point fingers and say we should do more, it should be different, it should be faster. But it's hard to say that he's not taking it seriously. I think he is taking it extremely seriously. Now, some other positives. There are practical steps to build capability and drive adoption in government. What's that about? A specific approach to identify pilot areas and then scale them up. Whenever there is AI that can be adopted by a department, by a civil service, by a part of a government entity, is to find ways to adopt it and push it in there as quickly as possible. There is a big recognition that the government should be a customer. So there should be courage and encouragement to adopt new technology. I spoke with Peter Kyle at some length, who is the Secretary of State for the department that oversees all this, and he is firmly behind it. They want to drive it. They are having regular meetings with all of cabinet to talk about this. So everybody is getting read from the Riot Act, and you got to get this AI in everywhere. Now, are they going to get it done? It's government, etc. It's easy to sort of be skeptical, and I think it's probably justified to some extent. If I was going to be critical for a minute, I'd say what are some of the things that may be still missing? Despite Matt's background in VC, there wasn't very much talk about the role of venture capital in the plan. And if you look at where the funding has come from to drive innovation in the US, the VC community has been absolutely central to that. The question for us, I think, is how do we unlock more capital to scale up? They are talking about pension reform. I think you have to tie it very closely with this AI initiative. Without more money, it ain't going to happen. It costs $300 million to develop a unicorn. I was called up maybe 250 billion sterling if you want here, but that's still a lot of money in the context of even some of the bigger funds we saw announced here in the UK last year. The second thing is talent. We got to talk about the elephant in the room. London used to be the talent magnet for all the best and brightest in Europe. I think we still see some of that, but it has become a lot harder after Brexit. Yeah. Now, the European Union has offered us something incredible, right? Which is the youth mobility scheme. And, as I said to them, it's all A, take the deal, and B, if you increase the threshold, the cutoff now is to say there should be sort of quasi freedom of movement for people under 30, increase it to 35, and you're practically done. You're going to start mopping up the best talent again. Folks are going to come to London and establish companies and build and do and be part of this great, ecosystem we have here. So I think the talent point is the second thing. And then I'd say the third point that I'd like them to talk more, aggressively about is the efficiency drive. Because let's be honest here, one of the things...
Is that where we're going? Is it going to be the Lomax, Mads and Dan Doge? Can I be Vivek?
We are talking about the challenges we have around investment and can't balance the books, can't do what we need to do with NHS, can't do what we need to do with education. Well, it turns out we've got the biggest efficiency boost, a tech efficiency boost we have ever had in history in the form of AI. We've got to talk about where we can deliver that efficiency. So where we're going to see the efficiency in NHS, where we're going to see the efficiency in the other parts of civil service, what's it going to mean in headcount terms? It doesn't mean that, we necessarily get rid of all the people, but there must be places where we can, implement and drive efficiency to free up resources elsewhere. And without that side of the equation, I feel we're a little bit deluding ourselves. We got to have the courage to do that. I have a slight concern that Labour being Labour is worried about the unions and aren't going to take on some of these tough conversations that I think are needed for us to protect the quality of service that we need to and want to deliver to citizens. So that was the third point. But I would say overall, I'm actually very encouraged by what I've seen.
Oh, good. Well, it's great that you went, and it's great that we've got kind of first party insight into how all this is fitting together. And I hope it all comes to pass. Lomax, anything else to add on this one?
No, I think I couldn't agree more with Mads on the on the immigration side, like making it easier for young people to come here and set up companies. The only thing I can see as an impediment to that, and I think this is what stopped the Labour government doing this earlier in their term, is they're worried that that will kind of will be a sort of simple thing for the Farage and co to slap down very, very easily and pick up as a football. So they're very, very
Here's the
worried about
counter.
that, I think. Yeah.
Yes, I agree with you. Here's the counter. Reform is already ahead of Labour in the polls. They have 3 years to make a difference.
Yeah.
And if we don't get growth back, if we don't get all of this stuff working, guess what? There ain't going to be a second term. You've got to be super aggressive.
I fully agree with you, Mads. I mean, it's time they show strong leadership on this. But I'm saying, like, politically, it's a very hard thing for them to do because they're paranoid about seeing as if they are unwinding Brexit, politically. Even though we all know here that it would be, we need to do this if we want all the unicorns to be built in this country. I'm just
wants growth.
Making that observation. Yeah,
absolutely.
Well, they're going to have to come. Yeah, they're going to have to come out. I mean, we've talked. I think we've talked here is like the infrastructure projects, great, et cetera, but it's the softer things like immigration that and attracting talent that really move the needle in the short term.
But there was some talk of an Australian-style point scheme. I remember about maybe 5-10 years ago. That feels like a very sensible approach. I don't know if that's still
I think that what Mads is talking about, which is the enabling free movement of people for people under the age of 30, although increasing it to 35 would be very powerful. It's the simpler thing to do. But yeah, otherwise you fall back on skills based.
There was another UK kind of thought article challenge this week was around the UK being an incubator within the context of startups for other countries, namely the US. So lots of startups start up here and then shift over to the US to sell, to raise, to exit. And I've always thought this was a massive thing. Everybody was doing it. Every startup wants to go to the US. It's the land of sunshine and glory. This must be happening across the board. So I dug into a couple of reports that I found, and I'm not going to go through all of the detail because being very academic reports, they were extremely detailed. But there were two reports. One was by Yuan Xia, Olaf Sorensen, and David Wagerspak, which was called, if you want to look it up, it's called the New Argonauts, the International Migration of Venture-Backed Companies. The other one was called Venture Capital and the International Relocation of Startups by Weck. I'm going to get her name wrong, Efflinger and Brown. Now, the latter one, this Venture Capital and the International Relocation of Startups, is the later report. It's September 2024, and it's a bigger data set. The first one I mentioned was only just over 1,000 startups looked at, or venture-backed startups. This data set's bigger. It's 11,000. And it looks like it's a lot less activity than I thought. There are a lot fewer startups moving from territory to territory. It is not this big swathe of everybody, shifting country, mainly Europe to the States. However, 85% of those that do migrate to the US, as a subset of that, I thought they would all go to the Bay, but only about 40% actually go over to San Francisco, because I thought that would be the natural hunting ground. And the main thread or the main key to this is, where are the investors? I thought it would be, where are the clients? But the main thread across both reports has been, follow the investors. And if it's an American investor investing in your early stage round, then you follow them back to the US. So I don't know who wants to start here. Mads, can I ask you to kick off with your thoughts?
Yeah, sure. Look, in tech, there are really two big economies in the world, and that's the US and that's China. And you could argue the rest are incubator economies to some extent if you want to. I think some of this came out of this report that was published by the House of Lords, which I thought it was well-meaning, but also a bit confused, perhaps. I think the truth is Europe could be a third major hub for tech, but we need to work together because, with all due respect, the UK, or fantastic and amazing place as it is, does not have the size or clout that China does or that the US does. So we need to work together. If we work together around talent, capital, market access, we can be that. And if we don't, we are going to be a satellite and talent is going to migrate. I don't think the UK needs to choose between the EU and the US. I've always thought we have this incredible place of being able to have, kind of maybe the foot we have on the European side is slightly bigger, but certainly also with incredibly strong links to the US. I built I've lived in London and ran a company in New York and the States and flew back and forth. And I've always loved sort of that bridging role we can play. I think that's so important.
I mean, we primarily invest in software, which is not like a territory landlocked thing. I mean, you can build wherever and sell wherever, which is happening every day.
Yes, exactly that. So I think, collaboration and pragmatism. And we know that there are some of the, on the ground level, there are some of the restrictions around how venture capital firm can operate, some of the new barriers that have been thrown up after Brexit in terms of companies moving, in terms of investors moving. Some of that stuff has become harder. And we know this. We need to make it easier again. I mean, what we cannot afford is to erect barriers to doing business. The world is far too competitive right now.
So do you think that we are, on balance, do you think that we are an incubator for the US?
Yes, of course. And I think the whole world is. I don't think that's specific to the UK. But I think if you look at, there's a reason we talk about the Max 7, right? There's a reason we look at these big businesses and we can see how they hoover up all the innovation everywhere. And if we want to change that, we need to build big champions in Europe, and then they can buy all these companies.
But I think there's like having, I feel like the House of Lords report is a little bit strange to me. It's like, well, I mean, first of all, like, don't we already know this? Isn't it obvious? And also, like, why is it, not necessarily why is it so bad, but look at the size of the economies, like, and look at the size of the technology sectors. And I mean, it's not both the biggest surprise, and it's not necessarily the end of the world. I would rather know realistically where we stand in the world and create a reasonable objective based on that, rather than
a plan, don't you, Lomax? Back to your plan.
Well, no, yeah, exactly. I love a good plan, rather than sort of out of like nationalistic sort of jingoism, driving some sentiment that we always need to be the best in the world, and then constantly being disappointed about it. What I would say just on the reports that you dug out, which look like fascinating reading, Dan, is the absolute number of startups moving to the US might be small, but actually I think if you looked into the kind of equity value or the amounts raised by those companies, you probably see a bit of a power law where the few ones that actually have raised the most amount of money are moving to the States, because actually the slightly laggard, slower ones that don't have the traction, can't raise the money, obviously by definition aren't moving to the States. So I'm sure there's some, like, that's a hypothesis, but behind the data,
no, that you're right. Those that
on.
move raise more. Yeah, it's a 3x up. Those that move
one
raise
thing
more
I think we haven't talked about is M&A, which is that this is where I think Europe has sold itself cheaply in the past. Yeah. And there's a few examples of this in the last 10, 15, 20 years that we can use, and in quite fundamental technologies. So Illumina is the big sequencing company, has 90% market share. A lot of the technology that underpins Illumina's offering came from an acquisition of a Cambridge-based company called Solexa that it did, I think, in 2005 or 6. I can't remember when. So you've actually got a company that during the bull market, Illumina got to an 80, 90 billion market cap, right? A lot of the core technology that gave that company a monopolistic position came out of the University of Cambridge. Exact Sciences acquired Base Genomics, an Oxford company, for 410 million as a seed stage startup 2 years ago. There's a lot of examples. I mean, Magic Pony, this company that came out of, Matt Clifford's accelerator, entrepreneur first, was bought by Twitter for Meta, wasn't it? Or Twitter, Twitter for 120 odd million, right? For team and tech. Like, I feel like we've sold ourselves short. The Europe, and then we talk about ARM. ARM, was acquired by SoftBank. We kind of, it got to a much bigger size of company, but actually you have these big core infrastructure companies or technologies that are actually being sold, I would say, too soon, before, for example, European shareholders, pension funds, etc., can really benefit from them. And I think that's something that maybe Arm is fine. It kind of grew to a reasonable size stage before being acquired. But you take the Selexa example, you take the base genomics example.
Do you remember the context?
Remind me the context, Mads.
The Arm acquisition happened the week after Brexit.
Yeah.
Because sterling tanked and SoftBank said, well, gosh, there's this lovely company here. Yeah. It's just become 25% cheaper, 30% cheaper.
Yeah.
Let's swoop in. Let's pick it up.
And it's another check mark in the annals of Brexit. But the point is that there are technologies that we have sold too cheaply, core technologies coming out of European universities. And that's something that I think could, because there is now the funding for that, to build those companies. Yeah.
That's it. If you're a founder, you're building a company, big US tech conglomerate comes along and says, listen, here's $1, 2, 3, $400 million. Do you want to sell? Well, the question is, what's the alternative? And what we have lacked are big European funds that can say, well, actually, do you know what? Here's another 50, here's another 100 million. Keep building. Here's the funding for you to grow and build this global behemoth. And if that isn't there, of course, you're going to take the money. If the alternative is an uncertain future and lack of funding. So I think you're absolutely right. And this is, Dan, back to your point, European venture, still younger. We are growing up. We are seeing more of these companies at scale. And that's what we need to keep funding the best businesses to really go all the way. Because I agree that that's what we want and need.
We know how to do it, right? This not 20 years ago. We know how the system works. We've been to the circus. We've been on the rides. We can build, and we've done it. And there are more of us doing it, and there's more money coming through. So there's almost no excuse.
How many founders in Europe would have had would have done what Zuck did when he turned down the $1 billion offer that he had for Facebook in the early days, right? Now, it's not just about, you can talk about personality and all that stuff, but it's also around optionality. Zuck had optionality. He could go out and, execute and raise money and grow, which, in a way, in Europe in the past, we haven't had that optionality. I think we haven't, founders haven't got that in full, but they certainly have more optionality now than they did to make such decisions.
Going back to the States very quickly before we kind of close off on Deal of the Week and looking at some specific startups. So Trump, one of his initiatives was starting a sovereign wealth fund. I have no idea how you do this when you have 36 trillion of debt, but parking that for a second, Trump wants to start a sovereign wealth fund. We in the UK have a national wealth fund. Norway has, I always forget what the Norway one is called. It's called the Government Pension Fund Global, GPFG, which I think is the largest in the world. It's got 1.5 trillion assets under management. Obviously started by oil and gas in Norway, but it's an extremely powerful success story as to how sovereign wealth can work. So Trump wants to start one. He's tasked, who is he tasked? It's Scott Bessent and Howard Lutnick with developing a plan within 90 days, a very quick plan, maybe to buy TikTok, who knows? They're looking to leverage some of the tariff revenue. If you look at, even if it's a 10% global tariff, there'd be 400 billion annually coming in. They've got government assets of around 6 trillion. So they're trying to use those two revenue streams, if you like, or asset bases to create their sovereign wealth. So are there any lessons here for Europe? Can we follow Norway's success? Is the National Wealth Fund fit for purpose? Lomax, have you got any thoughts on Europe or the UK doing something akin?
No, I mean, normally to run a sovereign wealth fund, you tend to be running at a surplus. So, not many economies can say that or have the benefit of that. Norway clearly had a very unique position with its oil reserves, and Singapore has been an amazing success story with a $2 trillion GIC, which actually I was reading is the biggest investor in European startups of all sovereign wealth funds is GIC actually. One of the biggest sovereign wealth funds in the world. So I don't have a particularly strong opinion on it. Not something I'm an expert on, but, I'm sure governments would love to be in a position to have the surplus to do this. Let's not forget, this is not the only way that you can invest, governments can invest, at least within the budgets that they have, they're doing a tremendous amount of investment, right? In their own economies normally. I mean, they have international development spending, which I think the target was, 1.3%. Well, obviously Trump's ripped that up now by taking out the USAID. But this concept sort of is all, regardless of whether you kind of create a shiny office and put sovereign wealth fund above the door. This kind of is already happening in practice. But of course, I'm sure nations would love to do this, and if spent wisely. You do slightly worry with these funds. Are they a little bit thinking of the Palantir discussion we had earlier? Is it a way for, incumbents to reward cronies? Does it create another avenue for corruption? Because, let's not forget the UK, the US, despite, thinking that everywhere's whiter than whites, on corruption indices, it's probably worse than you think. So I don't know. No strong view other than, more money investing in infrastructure and
good,
technology projects is good.
Yeah, I'm with you. I'm kind of of the mind that almost as long as it's fairly legal and fairly moral, kind of just invest. Mads, you got any thoughts on this?
Yes, there are always there are two sides to a balance sheet. Clearly, Western governments have lots of liabilities, lots of debts. There are also assets, and I think it's a valuable thing to think as a business and think about these assets in a creative way. Trump's looked at TikTok and sort of said, look, that's actually quite a valuable asset here. We can close it, but maybe we should see if we can do a deal where we keep the asset alive and maybe the US taxpayer gets to benefit from some of it. Maybe that's not such a dumb idea. We know that we have the National Infrastructure Fund here in the UK. We got the British Business Bank, lots of assets. Some of them are actually really good. And if we think about what's happening right now with artificial intelligence, and if we think about how important the government's role is in driving this, does it make sense for the government, for us as taxpayers, to have a stake in the upside of some of that wealth creation? Well, it probably does to some extent. Now, there are challenges to it, and some of it is the potential politicization, where is money just going to go, as you say, to cronies? Is there going to be corruption? Are you going to have too much coziness? And I think this is the tension one would have to manage. I think in a new AI world where AI becomes as central as it is, I think it probably does make sense for governments to try and find ways to not just be a customer, but also to some extent to benefit from some of the upside that's being created in a smart way. But you have to manage the risks very carefully. You have to have professionals involved. You have to have, transparency. You have to have all these things at arm's length. So I think it's a really interesting development, and I not something I would dismiss out of hand.
No, I think that's fair. To close off, before I let you lovely humans go, we've got a number of European deals of the week. So Lomax, do you want to kick off what's been happening on the deals of the week?
Well, no specific deal of the week for me this week, other than like three really interesting health tech deals, of like reasonable size. Khosla came in and led the seed of a cancer detection company in the UK called See the Signs, which is interesting to see Khosla. They don't drop down to our lowly level that often. So interesting to see something that made, Vinod or whichever partner it was, kind of jump off the fence there. Gaia raising a infertility insurance, funding IVF, raising a nice Series A, and then Spanish AI imaging company called Cuban raising a big 50 million Series A. So
Nice.
long way this continue. It's a good week for European health tech, I'd say.
We'll take it. And Mads, Arm is acquiring Ampere.
Well, that's the rumor. We talked a little bit about Arm earlier on, and we've talked about European tech champions. And Arm is a plus $100 billion company in valuation, but it's not quite a $1 trillion company, certainly yet. And there are lots of questions about whether they will ever get there. But part of what's interesting here is Ampere is it's basically a company that makes chips. So they use Arm's IP and they make chips for data centers. And by acquiring this company would move Arm from being just a provider of IP to actually making chips and selling them into hyperscalers that can use them for cloud use, for inference, kind of right in the AI game, could compete with Intel and AMD. And SoftBank, clearly has boundless ambition and is willing to put money behind it. So yes, it is a Cambridge company with a CEO who is American, who is based in the US, who probably has most of their revenue coming out of the US. But I think we'll still sort of take it as a European business. And I think putting money behind Arm to go and make some strategic acquisitions to bolster that business, it could be a really exciting move. So yeah, some interesting things happening there.
Nice, thank you, gentlemen. What's coming up this week ahead, Mads? What's happening for you next week?
So I am heading over to my girls' school
Lisbon.
to talk about well, yes, to see the sun,
Go see
to
Lomax.
talk about entrepreneurship, to talk about what it takes to be a founder and build cool tech companies. Something I'm looking forward to. And then I've also got a bunch of board meetings next week, catching up with a lot of our favorite
Bored,
companies.
not
and see how they're doing.
bored, right? Loving it.
That's
Loving it.
it. We should rename them.
Lomax, what are you up to? What's happening with you?
We're closing an investment in a space company. We are working on a series, very actually sizable Series B. Might make deal of the week, but if I'm lucky, run it past.
Bring it on.
Don't want to be corrupt here, run it past you guys objectively. That's my focus, working with a portfolio and welcoming a new founder into the outsized family.
Nice.
Amazing.
I might be heading off to Finland to meet a founding team that is doing very cool diagnostics in pets. So diagnosing cancers in dogs and looking after. So hopefully that'll come off. I'm very much looking forward to that if it does.
Interesting,
Gentlemen.
Oh, sorry, I was going to say. I thought pet therapies was always a very interesting investment area. Because you had the huge upside potential, but to get the clinical trials for pet therapies is in pets. It's not in so it's a fraction of the cost to get drugs into market, which you can then use in humans if they pass the trials. So I think it's fascinating.
Yeah, no. Hopefully the meeting will happen. I'm very much looking forward to that. Lovely people, love you dearly. Catch you next week.
Love you. Bye bye.